Hello YouTube, it's Draconic Author here again. I've been meaning to do a video where I introduce myself to you guys, and the Internet Creators Guild is currently promoting itself through the tag createICG. And I thought this was a great opportunity to explain why I do YouTube videos, why I have a blog, and why I write. My favorite things to create are stories. Ever since I was little and I first read The Phantom Tollbooth, I've been filled with this love of storytelling and of imagined places. One of the easiest ways for me to create was with Legos. Legos let you explore places that only toys and a childlike imagination can take you. So whether it was the far reaches of space or the deepest jungles, the ocean floor, Lego has always had sets of toys that allowed you to explore that special place in your imagination. But after you take the pieces out of the box and assemble them into their prescribed form, you can always take the thing that you made apart and build something brand new. In fact, as a young kid, I had several boxes full of loose Lego pieces that I would dig into. And way before you could go to Toys R Us and buy the X-Wing model of Legos from the new Star Wars movie, I would try to put together my own little crude X-Wing or TIE Fighter or Millennium Falcon based on just the pieces I had in the box. It was before the re-releases in the late 90s. It was before Episode 1 and The Force Awakens came out. Now, that love of creating stories and sitting there in the basement with my toys, action figures, Lego creations, imagining scenarios, I fell in love with writing, especially after reading The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. No other book at the time, and this is at the same time, mind you, that Harry Potter is in the midst of being written still. Book 3, Prisoner of Azkaban, had only just come out, maybe that same year that I first read The Fellowship of the Ring. And with the Peter Jackson film trilogy coming out that same 3 years, following 3 years, reading those 3 books and then seeing Peter Jackson's vision of Tolkien's creation on screen filled me with a desire to write my own stories and put them to paper. Now, writing is my favorite way of creating, and I find avenues to express that using Dungeons & Dragons, creating games for my friends, or playing games like Skyrim and Fallout, where I can be my own character and go out in a story and kind of invent my own narrative. But its best form, which you can see parts of on my blog, linked below, is the novel that I hope to someday publish. Whether it was sitting in the back of my trigonometry classes, driving my teacher crazy, or at lunch, or even sitting in the gym during my high school years, scrolling on the back of a loose piece of paper, ideas or images or maps. I've had this desire to tell a story completely devoid of humans, because all the stories I've read as a child always included humans. Even The Lord of the Rings, with its elves and dwarves and hobbits, all 3 are just different kinds of human. And maybe it was because I was bullied as a kid, or maybe it was just because I had a strange sense of imagination and wonder, and probably a mildly obsessive love of dragons and dinosaurs. I wanted my character to be a reptilian. All of these things can be found on my blog in snippets here and there. I obviously don't want to tell my story before it's finished, because of course things can change, but that was probably one of my most... That story is something that, even when I'm not working on it, I try to think about and tease out the things that hold me back from writing, whether it's a character conflict or even coming up with a character. I often have trouble coming up with names, often have trouble coming up with descriptions. Not out of lack of creativity, but it's more of a unable to pinpoint or lock down just one idea that I like better than others for a particular character. And sometimes it takes things, external things, that give me that influence, that idea that finally pieces it all together. For instance, Horizon Zero Dawn came out a couple weeks ago, And I find the artwork that Guerrilla Games did for the Nora tribe, the Karaja tribe, as great pieces that reflect something I wanted to tell in my story. I just didn't know what it looked like. So my main characters come from a culture that's somewhat primitive compared to the wider world. The culture decided to stick to its roots, to use tree and animal parts and plant parts as all that they needed. They regressed purposefully to a slightly more advanced version of Earth hunter-culture societies using bows and arrows and spears, while holding on to textile techniques and even some minor metal working and stone working techniques that might have been otherwise more advanced, while the rest of the world is a typical medieval-esque fantasy setting. So when I looked at Horizon Zero Dawn for the first time, I just appreciated their own version of that idea. Now, of course, they're regressed from a much higher level of technology than the characters in my book. The characters in my book went from a Middle Ages sort of technology to native peoples, kind of a Stone Age Plus style, much like in Horizon Zero Dawn. While they don't use guns per se, they still use pieces of the robots they collect to do things like create bombs, create traps, to create weapons that launch, devices that freeze or electrocute their targets, because they're dealing with these machines that can do the same. Of course, all the technology and exactly how it works is never fully described in either Horizon Zero Dawn or any work of fiction. Some things are always left to that suspension of disbelief. But for me, when I come across something like that that helps me write, helps inform the look or the aesthetic, or even just helps me figure out what exactly I wanted to do with a character, I will take that into what I do, and it's a way of creating through borrowing. And I think that people who spend a lot of their times using Legos a la carte, as in not necessarily from a package with directions, as I'm doing in this video, that they see something like an X-Wing or a spaceship or a submarine or a dinosaur, whether in other Lego sets or in their own life, and they make it. They find ways to invent by borrowing ideas and concepts from others. That might be a very loose way of saying whatever it is I'm trying to say here, but creating for me has always been a little bit of borrowing, a little bit of loving, and a little bit of just seeing what works, which I guess maybe is a little bit like Legos.